Thank you, everyone, for coming on time. So we are discussing today from a more Kabbalistic perspective, the concept of a man, the concept of a woman, and the dynamics. Of course, we've touched on this before, and of course, we're going to touch on other things as well, but that's sort of the overarching theme tonight. And I wanted to start with a vignette from the first leader of Chabad, who's referred to in the Hebrew as Admor HaZaken, or the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. And it says that the Alter Rebbe, the Admor HaZaken, he was once like, as we would say, in the hall. I don't know exactly the setup of his house. He was outside a room and he heard his wife talking to several, I guess, of her friends. And his wife said, she was speaking in Yiddish, and in Yiddish she said, meiner, which means mine, meiner, mine said, and this was how she was referring to her husband. Instead of saying, my husband, my spouse, the rabbi, the Rebbe, she said, mine said, which was obviously a reference to her husband. So when her husband overheard this, she wasn't talking to him. When he overheard this, he literally fell into an intense spiritual contemplation. This like sparked him. As we would say today, this triggered him spiritually, very intently. And he got into a very, very deep space as he said, wow, what like put him in such awe? With one commandment, I became yours. The commandment of marriage. He did one mitzvah and suddenly he's his wife's. Mine said, with how many commandments am I God's? And he literally, we would say, fell into a swoon. Like he just fell into this deep, deep, intense, like out of this world experience where he's like on the floor in this deep, 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 somewhere other place. And when he came out of it, when he returned back to planet Earth, he said, wow, this is like the verse. There's a verse that says in Hebrew, Se'ena or Enna B'not Zion, which means go out and see daughters of Zion. Go out and see daughters, female, of Zion. And he said, like, how did he now explain this verse? To go out of yourself and see God, go out and see God. How do we go out and see God? It's through the daughters of Zion. It's through the women. The women are the ones that get us, the men, to go out of ourselves and see God. And then he said, now he then explained this Kabbalistically, and he said, this is the women represent God's feminine dimension, as we've mentioned many times, which is called Malchut, sovereignty, the lowest of God's 10 attributes, the feminine attribute. And the 6 attributes higher than that, again, in Kabbalistic way of understanding God, we have 3 intellectual energies, 6 emotional, and then the final one, the 10th, sovereignty, Malchut, the feminine dimension. So we have 6 emotional masculine energies, and the 7th energy, I will not test you on this, but it's good to keep it in mind to understand, 6 emotional masculine energies, and the final energy, 10th of the 10 or 7th if we're starting from the 6, is sovereignty. That's the feminine energy. So Malchut, the feminine dimension, arouses the 6 higher emotional masculine energies. And that's what it means by Mashiach. Because by Mashiach, it will be fulfilled the verse, which we probably all know, Ishet Chayil Ateret Ba'ala. A woman of valor, an Eshes Chayil. She's the crown of her husband, right? Eshes Chayil. So that woman of valor is the crown, because crown means over, on top of the head, beyond the body structure. So there's a verse that says a woman of valor is a crown. We're on top of our husbands, but we don't always see that now. But by Mashiach, this will be fulfilled. So there's a lot in here, and there's a lot in here that sort of speaks about, in a very Kabbalistic and supposed to be reflected down to earth way, on the dynamics between a man and a woman. I'm going to try to unwrap the incident a little more, to explain a little more clearly, point by point, and then see how we elaborate on that. So we have here this woman, I'm sure a very great woman, Admiral Zakein's wife. I'm sure she was very holy in her own right. And when she's talking about her husband, she said, mine. She didn't say his name. She didn't say my husband. She didn't say my man. She didn't say my rabbi. She said mine. Like he's mine. And when he hears this, he says, why am I yours? I'm yours because we did one mitzvah together. We got married. That's a mitzvah. If I'm yours through one mitzvah, by how many mitzvahs am I God's? And he was like, wow, so spiritually inspired by this idea of like, how much am I God's? Who got him spiritually inspired? His wife. No, she wasn't trying to spiritually inspire him. But in the end of the day, what she did inspired him, even though he was probably on a higher level than her, just because he was, this world leader of spirituality. So I'm sure she was very, very, very great also, but perhaps he was on a higher level, but that's irrelevant. If he was or if he wasn't, she inspired him. And he fell into this deep ecstasy of divinity and connecting to God. And he's like lifted up to such a level that he said, that's what the verse means. Se'ena or ena. To go out of yourself, out of your box, out of your limitations and see God. You know what you need? Benotzion. You need a woman. That woman, that wife, she's going to help you get out of your box and see God. Now, obviously, the box of Admor HaZaken was very high, but it's true for all of us. We're, like we said, the motor. We keep the man that he can move forward and get out of himself. Even if you say, oh, my, he's really high. True, but he needs you to lift him even past himself and connect on a deeper level to God. And then he connects this Kabbalistically, as we've explained, to the idea of the woman as God's feminine dimension, Malchus, and the man as God's masculine dimension, called Kabbalistically Zeir Anpin, which means the 6 emotive energies. So we have the 6 emotions and we have sovereignty. And if we would look at this as it be laid out, if you'd ever see any Kabbalistic charts, the 6 emotions are higher than Malchus. But Malchus, sovereignty, can be the catalyst to move them higher. And that's what he's saying is happens in this world as the human embodiment, me, the Malchut, my husband, those 6 emotions, me, God's feminine dimension, him, God's masculine dimension. Literally, it's so. Literally, every couple is embodying God's feminine and masculine dimensions. That's, on a totally different note, but that's the same reason why it says the evil inclination is going to do whatever it can to create friction between man and wife on Fridays. Why? Because God, Friday night, has this fusion of his masculine and feminine parts. Intimacy of God to create new godliness in this world. And we, as the human manifestation of that, when we're intimate, when we're close with our husband, we're creating the ripple effects above. So if me and my husband are not feeling very close, it's also somehow impeding what's going on above. So that's why the evil inclination works triple hard Fridays for us to not get along. Now, if you want to take this a step further, you could say, cosmically, we're in Friday every day. As we actually discussed last week, how the 6 days of creation, the 7 days of creation, each create a millennium of history. So where we're holding right now in the year 5782 is late Friday afternoon. Every single day of our life is late Friday afternoon, which means every single day of our life, in essence, God's masculine and feminine energies are supposed to be coming together. And therefore, my husband and I are supposed to be feeling fused and connected. And therefore, the evil inclination works triple time every single day to create friction between us so we don't fuse, so God's energies don't fuse. Because from a cosmic perspective, every day of our life is Friday afternoon. But I just brought that in, a side point, but it's not really a side point. It's very relevant to our conversation in terms of understanding how far this goes of every woman being God's feminine dimension and every man being God's masculine dimension, and the idea of the fusion of the two, and the idea that the feminine elicits the masculine.
Yeah.
That we have an ability, even though, again, if you look at the paradigm, you would say that malchut, sovereignty, is lower than the feminine, is lower than the masculine. You see? That Admiral Cain says, no, but she elicits. She raises it higher, just like his wife did to him. And that's what we mean by Mashiach, that the woman's going to be the crown. Then it'll be revealed how her energies are supreme. So there's a lot in this vignette in terms of our relationships with our spouse, and going back to this topic that we're talking about, which is physical intimacy. But as you can see here, it's not only in the realm of physical intimacy. That wasn't part of the storyline that we just discussed, but it's still that idea of how God envisions the dynamics of relationship, and how when we do it God's way, that's really making this a threesome, yourself, your husband, and God, and bringing enormous blessings because he's part of it. And of course, we definitely do want to connect this to physical intimacy, because physical intimacy is like how the most physical we can get. And yet we're saying here, there's a lot of godliness going on. And as we've mentioned before, but really strongly to understand this, very, very important. I know I've said this before. I'll probably say it again, because for a lot of us, it's very counterintuitive. But the physical intimacy is a very godly act that really builds the strength of the marriage. It really, really, really does. And that's why it's something, as we discussed last week, that our sages praise the woman who makes herself beautiful for her husband and all of those things. It's really reflecting it's really important to invest in this. So we've been saying, and this is not the first time I'm saying it, that relationships, the physical relationship between a husband and a wife, build the strength of the marriage. Can anyone comment on that? Does anyone see how it does strengthen the connection of the spouses in other areas as well? That it doesn't just stay in the bedroom, so to speak, but it really goes out of the bedroom and into really the whole marriage and the whole family.
This is Soren.
Mhm.
Well, for me, I can just think of parenting, because when your husband feels more empowered and, in his own ways, he's a much better father, I've noticed, and like a much better just like leader of the family. In my opinion, I feel like it bleeds also into his work. And when he feels more empowered, it's just so many effects.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You used a beautiful word. You say when you're empowering, which is really part of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And that really, really, really is true. And that doesn't just stay in the relationship between the two of you. It does just naturally flow into everything else going on. Anyone else has seen it or has seen something in this area that they'd like to share? It's really true. Maybe it's like hard to talk about, especially on a Zoom class. If we were in person, maybe it'll be a little easier talking. But it's really true, and it's something to really reflect on. It's really something to reflect on, how when we say it's the strength of the marriage, it doesn't just mean if this is working, the marriage is okay, or even this is working, the marriage is strong. What it means is exactly as Anna said, it flows into all the other parts of the dynamics of your dynamics with your husband, of his dynamics with yours, of yours with your children, of his with your children, of empowering him, as she's saying, even out of the home to be a different person. It really, really, really works like that. And maybe it's good to sort of reflect on that and see, have I seen that? Am I aware of that? Am I helping make that happen? Part of this is really giving your husband this sense that intimacy is important to you. And part of what we're saying, building your husband, building your marriage, building your husband, building your family. Like you show him and yourself that the bedroom's an important room, that it should be a beautiful room, that there should be beautiful linen, that it should be clean, that maybe there should be a candle or something with nice smells, if both of you appreciate that. There could be a small couch. The bed should be comfortable and the right size, and all of these things, even if as you're doing them, he doesn't say anything, but he's getting the message. Just like as we discussed last week, oh, my husband doesn't notice if I put on makeup or not, or if I look good or not. He does notice. He might not ever tell you. He might not. That's a separate issue. Does he notice? He notices. Does he notice that you make the bedroom look nicer and more inviting and a room you're investing in? He's going to notice that you're going to put there your attention before the kids' bedrooms, before the guest bedroom, that this is a significant room. He notices. And it's just part of it's like, as our sages say, a beautiful home, a beautiful wife, all these things build, all these things create something. When you think about it, if you think of like I don't know how many years you've been married. I've been married over 30, so it's a long time to think back to when this all started. But if you think back to those like preliminary steps of your marriage, everything is like fresh and focused, and hopefully fresh, focused, and right. And it's an amazing woman who can retain that preliminary sense, or if she's lost it, regain it or recreate it or simulate it, because it's really, again, prioritizing the marriage. So just like when you, for me, 30-some years ago, at least in the religious world of getting married, the first thing you do before you meet is you find out about the other person, just to check if this is the right one. Does he have my priorities? Does he have my values? Generally, the broad strokes. Obviously, there's always surprises, but do we have the same vision of children? Or when you're going out, do we have the same vision of children, of marriage, of family, of God, of Torah, of how we're supposed to lead a life? And you decided yes because you went out with him, and he decided yes because he went out with you. So that's a great thing to remember all the time, especially if you're annoyed or frustrated, that wait, there's a reason we got married. There's a reason we went out. I looked into him and we have the same priorities. We have the same values. That's why we started this whole relationship. It's because sometimes there's a lot of like little annoyances, little things that we don't love, and that's normal. We're human. Someone called me today over something, doesn't make a difference, something. And it was like your husband's human. I mean, thank God, if he was perfect, it'd be much more intimidating. He's human. Thank God we're all human. Thank God we all probably have little things that aren't exactly as they should be. Lubavitcher Rebbe says that just as there's no perfection on one side of the mechitza, there's no perfection on the other side of the mechitza. It's okay. We can accept humanity. But sometimes we get annoyed by it. We get annoyed that he's not perfect or very far from it. And if we just say, wait, let me remember why I went out with him. Do we have the same outlook? Do we have the same values? Do we have the same priorities? That's what started this off. Let me remember that. That's why we started this. Now you could say, no, we don't, or I wasn't thinking then. It wasn't a shidduch date, or I changed, or he changed, or we both changed, and we really don't have the same values and priorities now. Okay, then you need a lot of work. But if the answer is yeah, I mean, we did start off that way, and we do, or we've grown to have the same values and priorities. Okay, so humanity's humanity, but there's a reason why you're together. Sometimes, when you're upset, sometimes it's good to like try to see the whole picture and like, change it, look at it a little differently. Like, there's a story on it's a joke, a story on if it happened or it didn't happen. Like some man comes to a rabbi and he's complaining about his wife, she's such a not a balabusta, not so on top of how clean and organized the house is. And the rabbi said something like, well, how many kids do you have? And he said a nice number. He said, listen, maybe, maybe because she's more relaxed, she can have this many children and just like appreciate that and don't focus on this. Okay. The answer worked for him. Then the next man comes in and he has the opposite complaint. Oh my gosh, my wife, I put something down. A second later, it's gone. She cleans it already. And the other says, well, like, do you know where the Scotch tape is in your house? And he's like, yeah, same place it's been for the past 15 years. Look at your wife. She's amazing. She's saving you so much time and stress because she focuses on all the details for you. What's the point of the story, vignette, joke, if it ever happened or not? Not the rabbi's answers, but that this exact, my wife is not a good enough housewife. My wife is too good a housewife. It doesn't make a difference. We'll switch it to say my husband. Maybe made up that joke. My husband. But it's like, if I can look at that situation and put it in the right frame of reference, it's not so bad. It actually might be good. It might even be very good. It might be very good for me. If I can find a frame that fits in properly. Anyway, it was sort of on the side, but the idea being just like you went out, you checked him out, you liked his values, the basics were in place. When you were going out, you were like on best behavior. You both were on best behavior. And one of the things I think that's very unique to when people go out, it probably only happens then, is we're very, very focused on listening to the other person. Not to make a good impression, that's a separate issue. We're listening because we're really trying to understand them. We're really trying to assess them. So we actually really listen. That might be the only time in our life that we really do that. Because the rest of the time when people talk, we're like thinking, what do I want to say back? What's my response? But when you're going out, you're more really just listening to him. He's listening to you to really understand what you are. And that's an amazing thing. If we can imagine always being in that space of like really listening to the other person, really hearing them. Of course, you could say, well, that's unrealistic and it doesn't last for 30 years. But imagine if you prioritized it. Imagine you really tried to listen to the other person. And then again, yes, as it continues, the courtship, getting engaged, the first beginning of marriage, there's so much investment. It's such a priority. Think if you know someone who's getting engaged, who is engaged, who just got married. I mean, that's the whole life. Now, obviously, you continue to live and other things do happen. But on a certain level, that pulse should be there. This is really important. This is the person I chose. This is the person who has my priorities and values. This is the person I'm excited to be with. This is the person I'm really listening to. This is the marriage I'm prioritizing and investing in and building with. Well, why are you still building? You're 30 years later. It's a never-ending building. You're always building in it. You're always, always, always investing in that building. So can we talk about this a bit? Can people share examples of how they are invested in their marriage?
I think my husband comes before my kids.
That's huge. You're consciously putting him before your kids.
Yeah, because I think the foundation is very strong, that everything underneath will follow, in the right way, in the right direction.
That's an amazing example.
I mean, the kids don't always appreciate that, but it's too bad.
I think it's an amazing example. I mean, the reason I asked the question is for people to share so people could, piggyback on other people's good tips. I think that's an amazing example. I don't know how many people could say that. I think that's a really special example to say consciously, I'm putting him first, meaning before my children. Because as she was saying, if he is first, it's all going to work better for the kids. It's really a way of helping my kids is putting him before them. Anyone else can give me like a really just like that, like a practical example of how you invest in your marriage? Not putting it on the spot, just to share so we can all like think about it.
Mrs. Turin? So I just try to avoid his triggers. Like if I know that there's something like, I don't know, like if I do a little too much shopping, like that seems to trigger him. So, like I watch that, or, like his triggers, we know our husband's triggers. So I feel like as long as I avoid those, then I feel like I'm investing in our marriage, and
That is an
his
investment.
temperament is better and everyone's happier.
That's a great tip. An investment in the marriage means hopefully by now you know your husband's triggers and you consciously avoid them. If you're going to do more shopping, he's not going to know about it. So put everything away before he comes home. So you don't want
to learn how to hide. You learn how to hide very, very well.
Okay, you hide it. You hide it because that means he's important, and therefore we don't need to set off a trigger because he's that important. That's great. Someone else? Just an example, like, your example. It's a good question to ask yourself. How do
Mrs.
I
Torres?
invest? Yes.
I actually had a question to what Shira just said. Are you supposed to put your husband first? Like, did I hear that right? You're not supposed to put your kids first?
Yeah.
What? Did I
Definitely,
miss it
Anna.
last
Come
year?
on.
I mean, I'm whatever. I don't know. I don't know.
It doesn't mean don't change your baby's diaper. It just means like your husband needs to be priority in your life.
Oh, for sure. Oh my God, of course. But I feel like, I don't know, like they're equal. But like, I feel like as mothers, like your kids are like, I don't know. As a mother, I feel like my kids always like, I don't know. They're my heart. They like as a mom.
As I understood what Shira was saying, I totally understand you, by the way, and agree with you. Anna, I agree with you. But what I understood Shira was saying, and that's why I thought it was such a strong point, was putting her husband first is a way of putting her kids first.
Because
if she's making sure his needs are met, he's going to be more invested in the family, a better father, more there, more. Is that what you meant, Shira? Am I like?
There's a way better way.
Yeah, no. Then the entire family is happy. Everything just kind of like falls into place, and everyone's in a better mood. Better space, better everything.
So you are absolutely, I agree with Anna. I think
like he has to feel loved and he has to feel important and appreciated and like just top priority. And then after that, he'll be able to give so much more to everybody else.
Really right.
Exactly. So I agree with Anna. I do think as mothers, our children are the number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 absolutely in our lives. And I agree with Shira. And I thought it was very smart what she said, because when you're prioritizing your husband, he's feeding the family, he's nurturing them, he's there for them. He's just like Anna, you said before, when you empower him, he's a better father, he's a better human, he's better in his career. We're very powerful people. So putting him first is really putting your kids first. It's putting your kids first that you put him first, because then he's going to so much more be there for everyone. It's like very wise investment of time and energy. Anyone else has any other tips that they do? Again, if you don't, this is a great reflective question. So I'm glad I'm asking it. But if anyone would like to share, it could be a small thing, but in small or large ways. Small tips are good too, because sometimes big tips are too hard for people, but small things they could say, oh, I could do that too. Something you do because you're invested in your marriage. Well, it's a good thing to think about. It's a good thing to ask yourself in a very practical way. What do I do? Because I'm invested in marriage. And if you can't think of something, something small. Dory?
I'm asking myself, and like, of course, right when you asked it, I said to myself, of course I'm invested. And then you said, show how, or say how. And I'm kind of baffled. I'm like, I can't really think of a good example of, so yeah, this is a good question.
It's a good question. Exactly. It's a very good question. It's a good question if you have a good answer, because that helps us think in different ways. Like maybe I never thought about avoiding my husband's triggers, but that sounds like an invested wife. Maybe I never thought about putting him first before the guys. That's an invested wife. So someone said
one thing we do is before the kids come home from school, we make sure we talk before, I get stressed out, or before, it gets really nutty in the house. We make sure we have just like a few minutes of just how's your day going? What's the plan for tonight? And just, we're both calm. So it's that works.
That's so nice. I was actually going to say one. Now I can't say easy because nothing is easy, but one, if you're looking to be invested, it's just like carving out sometimes a little time together. A little daily time is amazing. If that doesn't work with your work and his work and your schedule and his schedule, once a week, really carving out time together to talk. And sometimes specifically if you do that, you don't talk about the kids or you don't talk about problems. You just like enjoy being together. And sometimes you do want to talk about things because you actually have a chance to talk. So someone's sending me a message, and I think it's a very important message. I'm going to share it. And she's saying that it's very exhausting because investing in the marriage seems to always fall on women who are doing everything else also. And men are often very clueless when it comes to relationships. I don't disagree. Very often when I speak to various different types of groups of women, someone usually says something along those lines. I think it's a universal understanding. Why is it always the women that are talking about relationships? Why is it always the women that are working on their marriage? Why is it always the women? Like, why don't the men go to some of these classes? Or if they have such classes, would men ever show up? I don't know if they would. It's probably why they don't have them too often. It's true. I don't disagree. And I think going back to what Shira said is something to really like put deep in our hearts when we feel that if that little voice says, why am I the one that's always working on the relationship? Because women are much more in tune. We're much more in tune than men are. Not because they're not smart enough, not because they're not good enough. And this is, of course, the point I want to get to, is this idea of how God wired us very differently. And as we've touched on before, we're all products of the modern world. I mean, I think we all are. And the modern world has definitely given us this message that men and women are the same, slightly different bodies. And that's not true. And we have many gifts they don't have. And they have some that we don't have. That's good. That makes a marriage. So when you feel I'm much more in tune to relationships and relationship building than he is, for most men, that's true. I have met some that's not true. So I'm not saying it's true for all. I have, just speaking with various couples, have seen men that are very in tune and really get it and get it better than their wives, but that's not so common. More commonly, women have what our sages call Bina Yasera. We have an extra gene. We have an extra understanding, an extra intuition. I remember once, many, many years ago, a certain school in the city, they were trying to like improve. So they did like a survey, a boys division, girls division. And what they found, to their total surprise, was that people in the girls division were generally very happy with the teachers, and people in the boys division were very, very, very unhappy with the teachers. And they were like, this is so weird. The men are getting paid much more than the women. Fact. The women are pregnant or nursing or otherwise drained. And like, why does it seem that generally the women are good teachers and generally the men are not? And I think that was just the mystery. I think the answer is because being a woman has a certain extra understanding, intuition, a sensitivity. We get some things without them having to be spelled out. We feel. You're talking to your kid for 5 minutes on the phone. He's in a good space. He's in a bad space. I need to do this. I hope someone does. Like we feel it in a way that many men don't. I'm not saying all men don't, but many men don't. And if they don't, well, I mean, they didn't get the Bina Yisera, you did. Like, how could you have a complaint on them? You got it. So it's not to get frustrated at our husbands. It's not to get upset. Why don't they get it the way I get it? Why don't they care the way I care? Why don't they understand the way I understand? If your husband does, then it's like amazing and appreciate it. But if he doesn't, it's okay. He's normal. He's human. And say, okay, that's part of my being a Seder, but understanding that, as someone else just sent me in a chat, investing in him is investing in the family, is investing in the marriage, is investing in him naturally wanting to be the giver. And this is the point I didn't get to yet, but trying to get to this idea in the whole Kabbalistic model of a male-female relationship. A mashpia means the one who gives, the influencer, a mikabel, the one who receives. Wait, I'm the receiver? I'm the one doing everything here. But when we do it right, we're turning to our husbands as the recipients to empower them to be the givers. And then they get into that role, their natural masculine role, their true Kabbalistic origin role, and they're the giver because we're inspiring them to be the giver. So we have to remind them, we have to do a lot of the work to put them in the right space that then they can be as they're meant to be and as they're at their best. So they're really at their best when the man is at his best, when he's really giving in the marriage, giving to the wife, giving to the children, invest in the relationship. But we have to do a lot of the backstory work to create that because we have the Bina Yisera. We have a lot of intuition that a lot of men don't have. Some men have, but a lot of men don't have. And if your husbands are part of that vast majority of men, understand God made him that way so he can do his job properly. The same reason God made me this way so I can do my job properly. Meaning a woman, in essence, as I was saying before, I'm responding to Anna and agreeing with her, our main job, though we could have amazing careers and do lots of things and be powerhouses, my main job is being a mother. That's my most important career. That's my most important job, which doesn't mean I shouldn't do any of the others, but I should just understand what my most important one is. And as such, God created me. He built me to be that person that can be a mother, that can be a nurturer, that can help my child and take them in and feel them and guide them. And therefore, God gave me the skill set to do that, which is part of this Bina Yisera. That's not your husband's calling as his ultimate essence being. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be a good father. We all daven and hope that our husbands will be good fathers. But that's not his essence wiring. Really, his essence wiring is to be out there in the world, to be the doer, to be the conqueror, to be the achiever, to be creating the finances to support the family, to be battling the world out there to protect his family. So he needs a very different skill set. And that's why he's not burdened by this Bina Yisera, because that could distract him when he's dealing with that world. That would not be beneficial. But for me in the home, it's ultimately beneficial. And because I have this, because my primary role is to be a mother, I can use it when I go out and when you interact with people, a family, of friends, in your career. You can use that Bina Yisera. You can use it in a way that helps you. But for him, he wasn't given it because honestly, it's not the most beneficial thing for his job description. I don't know if what I said made sense to people. If anyone wants me to clarify more, you can ask me, you can send up a chat, but it's really true. He's not wired the way you're wired, and you do have that extra understanding of relationships that most of them don't have. And that's why we work on it more. But when we work on it, we're working on it in a way to bring him on board, and ultimately he will become that better husband and better father. So are they equals? They're equals. Are they the same? They're not the same. They're equals in a very different way. So anyone can feel comfortable to comment or disagree with anything I just said, or to send it up in the chat. It's fine to disagree. It depends which man.
Wait, what was the question?
You can read the chat.
I don't know how. Where do you go?
I don't know how. Do men
No.
know anything naturally?
Oh, probably not.
That's okay. That's okay. Again, just like going back to this woman I spoke to today who was in this panic about not worth explaining. But when she explained enough, so I understood the situation. I was like, okay, so your husband is not good at this. Clearly. It's not a horrible thing. It's not an evil thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a gift he doesn't have that you have. Well, let's turn the tables. Are there any gifts he has that you don't have? Well, she didn't answer right away. Think about that one. You know, that's a lot of times how it works. I can think of many ways my husband can do things I can't do. I can think of many ways I can do things he can't do. It's good. We're married. So do men know anything naturally? Hopefully some things that probably have very little to do with your arena, but hopefully in their arena, yes, they do. And hopefully they have skills you don't have. Because that's good, because you clearly have skills they don't have. So it's good to know it works in both directions. But going back to if anyone else wants to comment on this, I'm totally open on all trying to diverge away from this. I think it's a very important point. But if not, I also do want to draw attention back to what I was saying before, because I also think that's an important point in terms of thinking, even like in a small way, like, yeah, I'm talking. Yeah. Wait, how do I invest in this marriage? But you should have an answer. No, again, that doesn't mean you don't. It could mean it's personal and you don't want to share it. And you could always send it as a direct message and I can read it without saying your name. Or it could be, your mind's blank now. The naturals, you think of like the 20 ways you invest in your marriage. But if that doesn't happen and that doesn't happen, it's a good question for yourself. Like, yeah, I do want to be doing my part, and seemingly my part has to be bigger than his part. So I got to model. I've got to be the great model here of like, I'm investing in the marriage. And I'm saying even in the way of just, making sure the two of you go out once a week, or sit and have a cup of coffee together once a week, or take a walk once a week. Just it doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be for hours, but even a little drop to invest. Any ideas how to teach communication for people that are not good communicators? Anybody want to comment on that? Any ways of teaching good communication? Anybody have anything they would like to add to chime in on that question? How would you teach communication?
Maybe doing it with your children,
Yeah, I was thinking exactly.
being an example.
Exactly that. That's exactly what I was thinking. Modeling it and with your children is built-in house examples. If there are children around, when we model something again and again and again and again, it's a great way, very slowly for it to get in, and also really appreciating and sharing your appreciation when anything happens. Like if there was like a movement in the right direction, like a movement, really express appreciation for that movement. because people like, even if people act like they don't, people really appreciate it when they're acknowledged and affirmed, even if you could think, that's like this and I need this. Okay, but you only get this by a little this and a little and a little and a little and a little and many, 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 many steps. So it's really good to like affirm and be grateful and acknowledge. You could overdo it, but sincerely, so it doesn't sound fake and then like patronizing, but like in a sincere way, really show gratitude, really notice. I mean, in general, that's all of us are like that. And I do, I mean, try for my husband, I try for my children. If they did something appreciated, I try to tell them that. And sometimes I say it later because I didn't remember at the time to mention it. And sometimes I say it later because I think it's even more powerful to show that I remembered it a day later. I really appreciated that. Even little things. I remember it was Erev Shabbos. I was a little late running to ideally like handles early, but I don't know if that exactly worked out. I don't remember, but I know I was incredibly pressured for time. And my husband did a very little thing, but he ran and he got my son had my phone, my cell phone, of course, and he took it from him and he gave it to me to save me the 5 minutes would have cost me to do the same thing. And I was too busy to even thank him, But I remembered Motzi Shabbos to thank him for it because I really appreciated that he like thought, he realized, and he did something to help me. So everything, the more you like appreciate it and thank him and acknowledge it, the more he'll be inspired to try to do it and do it even more. And modeling, like Shira said, people that don't know how to do it need a lot of models. And you can model it with your children because they're around, you're around, he's around. So they hear it. Something else.
I remember
Mhm.
I remember also you told us that you would like purposely tell like your spouse or someone else what another kid did, knowing they were listening, but not say
yeah.
directly to them.
Yeah.
So I've done that a couple of times and I've noticed like, oh, you knew I really did that, or how did you know? But they're definitely listening.
They're definitely listening. Absolutely. Absolutely. That wouldn't work the same with your husband if he's right there, but with kids, it really is very powerful. Very powerful because like officially they're not listening to when you tell your husband that nice thing the kid did. That is good. Something else that you could also do to help sometimes if you want to like subtly give someone guidance, but you don't want to like criticize the person directly, is share with him stories in both directions, but make it like our sages say, within the words you're saying. There's a Hebrew expression for that, toch kedei dibor, which means you just happen to mention it. Like let's say, we're talking about here communication. So let's say there was a lot of miscommunication that happened, whatever, between you and your sisters at work. That's very much reminded you of you and your husband's situation. Great. This is a perfect example because you could tell it to your husband, but you're not criticizing him. You're not even talking about him. You're talking about your sisters, your colleagues, your neighbors, the kid's teacher. So you could say very strongly, but again, don't just talk about that. It could be a little obvious maybe, but say something before and something after and in the middle. You could throw in here, this happened and da, 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 da. And if only they had done da, 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 it would have cleared up the whole situation. Or conversely, you could do the same thing with good. Oh, it was such a relief when there was this great clear communication and I needed this, but so you're really teaching him without teaching him because you're talking about someone else so he can hear it, but you're really saying both what doesn't work and what does work. So sometimes that's a very good technique to try to convey any message to your husband.
My husband would totally know what I'm doing.
Okay, so then you can't do it. You can only do it if you can do it and if your husband wouldn't realize. If your husband's like, I think there's a reason why you're telling me that, don't try that technique. But for a lot of men, it works very well. But again, you like make a sandwich. You talk about something else first, then you talk about that, and then you talk about something else. So it's not like in your face, I'm trying to give you a message. But we make that sandwich and you don't do it every day, but maybe once a week. It's a good way to like more directly instruct as versus modeling, which is more indirect, praising, affirming, you got to wait till it happens. So this is the closest you can get to direct instruction. All three of those ideas work. They all work. You should use them in combination. You should use all three. And you should also, like everything in life, we have to have patience. We have to say, like, every little gain is a little gain. And if I keep on my end, I know it's going to happen. You know, imagine if someone was trying to, I don't know, lose 40 pounds. It's not going to happen in a month. It's not going to happen in 6 months. It might not happen in a year, you know, but as long as you're going in the right road, you know, it's going to happen. Hopefully. So you just have to keep having that long-term vision. As long as we're progressing, as long as we're seeing little improvements and we're not sliding, of course, as humanity, we slide back a little sometimes, but in general, it's getting better, it's getting better, it's getting better. Then you know, just give yourself enough time and you'll get there. That's an important thing to always keep in mind. As long as today is better than yesterday, tomorrow should be even better. Tomorrow should be even better. Today was good and tomorrow should be even better. And then give yourself long enough and you guys will get there. Okay, so we didn't get to really the we didn't get to really the more deep Kabbalistic piece I wanted to discuss, but that's okay. We'll get there next time. All right, let me just bring in something. I know for a while we somehow never get to the parsha because but no, I think last week we did. I think we did it quickly, but we did it. Yes, we did, because the week before we did it. So I'm going to give over an idea from the parsha, beautiful thought that you can share, inspire your children and your husbands, because you're going to also have something beautiful to share. So this week's Torah portion is Shalach, which is, of course, the culmination of the Exodus with the splitting of the sea. Today's portion, Wednesday, was the Shira, you know, the songs that the Jews sang after this greatest miracle of all time, the splitting of the sea. And we have two songs. We have the man song and the woman song. Notice I made this Dvar Torah to match our theme. So we have the song of the men. The song of the men is like long. It's 19 verses. If you look today at the Torah portion, there's a lot of Rashis. It's a long 19 verses. And then after that, we have one verse of the women's song. After Moshe leads the men in 19 verses, Miriam leads the women in one verse. So seemingly the men's song was a lot more important than the women's, but actually we see that's not true. How do we see it's not true? Because after the parsha, there's what we call haftarah, or you can say it properly, haftarah. And the haftarah, our sages pick the essence idea of the Torah portion is what they have in the haftarah portion. And the haftarah, I won't test you on it, is the song of a woman, Devorah the prophetess, Devorah the judge. It's her song. And that's very interesting because, again, Moshe's is 19, Miriam's is 1, but the sages say that woman's song, that's the key energy. And therefore we're making the haftarah not a man's song, like they could have picked the Song of David. No, they do a woman's song deliberately, the Song of Devorah, to reflect the energy of the Torah portion, which is Miriam's song. So the question is, well, why did they think hers was better? Hers was only one verse. So the answer is also written in the Torah, because the women's song had components that the men's didn't have, as it says clearly in the verses. The women were dancing, the men were not. And the women had musical instruments, tambourines, drums, however you're going to translate those words, but they had musical instruments. That's what our sages say, and that's what's written in the verses. So the women were dancing and singing, the men were just singing. The women were dancing, singing, and playing musical instruments, the men were just singing. So therefore, their song was better. Our song was better. We were those women, because the Arizal says we're a reincarnation of that generation. Our song was better. Great. So ours was better. We had dance and we had musical instruments. But what's so significant about dance and musical instruments? I mean, again, 19-1. Okay, we had dance and musical instruments. It's still 19-1. So dance expresses a very high level joy because it's a whole body experience. When you're singing, it's a part of you, but when you're dancing, it's your whole body is expressing this energy. Here, the energy is gratitude, joy, ecstasy in this miracle. So that shows how much better the woman's song was, because It was a whole body experience. The joy was so strong, it pulsated in their whole body. And also, we had musical instruments. The men did not. Why did we, just imagine as they're leaving Egypt with their knapsacks or their donkeys laden, why did they take along musical instruments? So it says, because the women of the generation, us, remember, we're reincarnations of those women, very righteous, very tuned in. We knew God would make miracles. We knew the miracles weren't over. So we took instruments so we'd be able to truly praise God. So the women's dance expressed their more intense joy, and their instruments expressed their intense readiness. They were cued in. They knew miracles were going to happen. So then the question is, so why? How come we had more joy that they ever expressed it in dance, more preparedness and readiness that therefore we had in our knapsack, our tambourines and drums already? Why were we in a place that the men weren't? And the truth is, that's in general how the sages look at the women. Again, it's just not a modern phenomena. It was back in Egypt. A saying of our sages, I'm sure we've all heard and know, in the merit of the righteous women, they were redeemed from Egypt. Our sages go on to say in their merit, we're redeemed from every exile. It's always in our merit. But going back to Egypt, it's clearly said, clearly quoted, all women's gatherings, remember that line, in the merit of the righteous women, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. So how are the women so different than the men? So the answer actually goes back to another interesting thought of our sages. Our sages say, Goel zu Miriam, which means the Redeemer was Miriam. Now, most people, if you ask them, non-trivia Jewish questions, who was the Redeemer from Egypt? Well, of course, the answer is Moses. But the sages say it was Miriam. Why? Because again, Miriam, she was a leader of the women. And she inspired and led the women to become those righteous women in whose merit the Jews would get out. Why? What was about her that she could inspire them so much? It also relates to her name. It's very interesting because her name was Miriam. Miriam is a very intense name because Miriam, our sages say, is from the word mar, bitter. She was bitter. She lived the worst years of the enslavement. God, in his kindness, we're supposed to be in Egypt 400 years. He managed to narrow it down to 210. We're supposed to be enslaved for 400 years. We were only in Egypt for 210. He even narrowed down that. He chiseled away. We were not enslaved for 210 years. We were enslaved. Most people not know the answer to this. You will now know, for 116 years. But the enslavement gradually, got more and more intense and, more and more harsh. So it wasn't 400 years. We were only in Egypt 210. It wasn't 210 enslavement. It was 116 enslavement. From the 116 enslavement, the intensity of the pressure, the horrors were the last 86 years, exactly the lifespan of Miriam when there was the Exodus. She lived through all those 86 years. So she saw this intense persecution, and she was a prophetess. It's very interesting. The verse that speaks, the verse prior to her song with the woman, it says, and Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, leads the women with the musical instruments and dance. And then we have that one verse of their song. It says the sister of Aaron. Like, what happened to Moses? She's only Aaron's sister. She's not Moses' sister anymore. So the sages explain that she's called the sister of Aaron because we're alluding to Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron. There's a culmination here of Miriam, the prophetess, when she was only Aaron's sister because Moses wasn't born yet. And again, I know it's late, so I'll try to say this very, very quickly. But before Moshe was born, their parents, Amram and Yocheved, who happened to be the leaders of the Jewish people, separated. Because Paro was killing out all the Jewish boys. And Amram said, I'm not creating children for Pharaoh to kill. So he separated from his wife. And he was a leader of the Jews. So all the men separated from their wives. And Miriam, his little 5-year-old daughter, had a prophecy. And she told her father, I had a prophecy. I mean, Amram was also a prophet, but God gave Miriam the prophecy. I had a prophecy. And in this prophecy, God said, Mommy's having a baby, a boy, and he's going to redeem the Jewish people. And Amram believed her. And he remarried Yocheved. And therefore, all the men remarried their wives. And then Moses was born. And then when they're putting him in the Nile, it says that our sages say Amram tapped Miriam on her head. You know, she was a little 6-year-old at this time. And he's like, my daughter, what happened to your prophecy? And that's why Miriam was standing by the reeds watching baby Moses in the Nile, because she knew she had a prophecy. What was God going to do? So from when she was very young, she had this prophecy. She knew the redemption was coming. And therefore, if you know the redemption is coming, exile's really bitter. Like if you sort of get numb and you think this is reality and it's never going to change, you numb out. So you don't feel the pain as much because you're not letting yourself feel. It's not safe to feel. But if you know this doesn't make sense, and you know God said Moses is born and redeem the Jewish people, and he was born and he's a great person and he's clearly the Redeemer, but it's not happening yet. And then Moses disappears for 40 years. So she felt simultaneously total conviction and belief in her prophecy. And therefore, because she believes so much in her prophecy, total pain with this aberration called enslavement. And these feelings she led the other women to have as well. Total belief in the prophecy, total belief and joy that redemption was coming. And therefore, because they knew redemption was coming, Miriam, from the word mar, total pain, bitterness over the enormity of the persecution. So therefore, and sorry, I'm saying this a little quickly, so I hope all the points match up. So therefore, when the redemption finally came, who was the most joyous? The people that believed in it the whole time. The people that were in pain over the exile the whole time. And therefore, when the Jews left Egypt, the women packed the instruments because they're like, we know it's not over. We believe and we know God's not done with all the miracles. God's not done with the destruction of Egypt. So it's an interesting thought. The more you believe in the future, the more you could have pain in the current situation. So there's the belief, there's the pain, and when the things unfold, there's the joy. And because you believe so much, and therefore because you're in such pain, the joy is so much more intense. So these women believed more than the men. And they had pain more than the men. So now when we come to the culmination of the destruction of Egypt, to the culmination of the Exodus, who has the most joy? It's natural. And that's why it expressed itself in dance. That's why they had the musical instruments. And that's why the sages said that's the ultimate song. And that's why the Haftarah is a woman's song, because of the woman's greater joy coming from greater belief, which also meant the price tag of greater pain. So that is a beautiful thought that has so much to think about, except we don't have time to discuss it anymore. But so many ideas there, really, really expressing our role as the woman, and as we're saying, as the ones that create the energy of the whole home and of the Jewish people. Thank you so much for joining. I really, really am glad that everyone was able to make it tonight.
Thank you.
Have a very, very, very inspired and invested week.
Thank you very much, as always.
Thank you.